One night in 1648, 280 women were sewn into weighted sacks and thrown into the Bosphorus to drown, all because one man was having a bad day. Divers working those waters for decades would tell stories about underwater forests of swaying bodies, creating grotesque dancing movements in the current. These women hadn't committed any crimes. They'd followed every rule, submitted to every humiliation, done everything their master demanded, and this was their reward. But that's just where our story begins. Because when you give one person absolute power over life and death, things get dark fast, really dark. Our story takes us to 19th century Spain, where Ferdinand VII, called the Desired One, became Europe's most grotesque monster. He didn't just destroy his wives, he destroyed an entire empire. Ferdinand was born cursed. Centuries of royal inbreeding created what French doctors called a perfect storm of anatomical dysfunction. His sexual organ was so misshapen that medical reports described it as belonging to a mythological creature rather than a human king. This wasn't just embarrassing, it was a death sentence for anyone who married him. His first victim was a teenage princess who arrived in Madrid full of fairy tale dreams. Maria Antonia was beautiful, intelligent, and genuinely excited about her new life. The wedding was magnificent, cathedral filled with music, streets echoing with celebration. But royal weddings end, and wedding nights begin. What happened next would haunt both of them forever. Despite all the preparations, all the custom devices Ferdinand had commissioned from Europe's finest craftsmen, all the consultations with Ottoman specialists smuggled into Madrid under cover of darkness, that first night was a disaster. The screams echoing through the palace corridors weren't screams of passion. They were screams of genuine terror and pain. Servants found blood-stained sheets and broken furniture, evidence of something that looked more like a medieval torture session than the romantic union of royalty. Maria Antonia never recovered. Court observers noted she developed a pronounced stutter and would physically flinch whenever Ferdinand entered a room. She started having what palace physicians called hysterical episodes, what we'd recognize today as severe PTSD. 3 years later, she was dead at 21. But Ferdinand wasn't done. He needed an heir, and he was willing to destroy as many lives as it took to get one. When Napoleon captured Ferdinand in 1808, you'd think this would be Spain's salvation. Wrong. While brave Spanish soldiers died fighting for his restoration, Ferdinand spent his exile years writing letters to European royalty, desperately seeking brides willing to accept his special circumstances. While his country burned, Ferdinand was planning his next wedding night. The French doctors who examined him during captivity left behind reports so disturbing they were sealed in Napoleon's archives for over a century. They described Ferdinand's condition as a genetic nightmare, multiple disorders combining to create what one physician called an anatomical impossibility made flesh. When Ferdinand returned to Spain in 1814, crowds threw flowers and wept with joy. But Ferdinand's mind wasn't on governing, it was on finding wife number 2. His first act as restored king? Commissioning an entirely new collection of marital aids from Europe's finest craftsmen. He sent agents to Germany, Italy, and even the Ottoman Empire, seeking artisans who specialized in delicate royal circumstances. Wife number 2 was Maria Isabel of Portugal, another cousin. She was 19 when she arrived in 1816, full of hope. Court physicians briefed her ladies-in-waiting about special preparations required for the wedding night, but nothing could have prepared her for reality. The wedding ceremony was Baroque excess designed to mask Ferdinand's growing desperation. He stood at the altar in cloth of gold, his face barely containing his anxiety. He'd spent the previous week consulting with physicians, alchemists, and that mysterious Ottoman specialist who'd arrived in Madrid under cover of darkness. The wedding night was another disaster. Despite all the new devices, all the expert consultations, Ferdinand's anatomical monstrosity proved as insurmountable as ever. The screams that night weren't passion. They were pure terror. Isabel never recovered from that first night. She developed the same stutter, the same flinching, the same psychological breaks as her predecessor. But here's where it gets really twisted. Ferdinand's sexual dysfunction wasn't just destroying his wives, it was destroying Spain itself. His obsession with producing an heir meant he ignored everything else. Cabinet meetings were postponed because Ferdinand was having a medical episode. Spain's American colonies achieved independence one by one, while their king was locked in his chambers trying to solve his anatomical problems.
The pressure to produce an heir became so intense that Ferdinand turned his marriage bed into a grotesque medical theater. He invited foreign experts to observe his intimate failures, German anatomists and French physicians, taking detailed notes while Isabel suffered through these voyeuristic consultations. Isabel, subjected to this parade of medical voyeurism, completely collapsed psychologically. She stopped eating, lost dangerous amounts of weight, and developed what servants described as a 1,000-yard stare. She'd become a living ghost haunting the palace that had become her prison. Meanwhile, Spain's enemies used Ferdinand's impotence as propaganda. Revolutionary movements from Mexico to Argentina pointed to their king's inability to produce heirs as evidence of divine displeasure with Spanish rule. Ferdinand's most intimate shame had become a rallying cry for independence. His response? Characteristic paranoia and brutality. He launched purges, targeting anyone suspected of spreading rumors about his condition. The Inquisition roared back to life under Ferdinand's paranoid direction. Torture chambers that had been sealed were reopened. Spain became a police state where the wrong joke about the king could mean death. Isabel died in 1818, just 2 years after her wedding. Official cause: tuberculosis. Palace insiders whispered about suicide or poison. Wife number 3, Maria Josepha of Saxony, arrived in 1819 with medical devices and a clinical approach. She treated royal duties as a medical challenge rather than romance. This practical approach served her better than Isabel's naive romanticism, but it couldn't overcome Ferdinand's fundamental impossibility. Their marriage settled into a pattern of scheduled, medically supervised encounters that resembled surgical procedures more than expressions of marital affection. Ferdinand began to suspect that Maria Josepha viewed him as a medical curiosity rather than a husband. His paranoia expanded to include fears that she was documenting his condition for foreign intelligence services. By now, Spain was in complete collapse. The empire that had once dominated the world was reduced to a minor European power, its decline accelerated by decades of misrule by a king whose personal obsessions took precedence over public duty. Ferdinand's final years were marked by the same sexual dysfunction that had defined his entire adult life. When Maria Cristina finally gave birth to Isabella in 1830, Ferdinand proclaimed her his heir despite widespread doubts about paternity. Ferdinand's final years were consumed by paranoia. He conducted midnight raids on his wife's chambers with armed guards, seeking imagined treason. He drilled peepholes into walls to spy on Maria Cristina's private moments. When Ferdinand died in 1833, Spain was ruined. His name was cursed in songs and jokes throughout Europe. The Spanish Empire that had once controlled half the world was a broken shadow of its former self, destroyed by one man's personal dysfunction. History remembers Ferdinand not as the desired one, but as the felon king, the most perverted monarch in Spanish history. His story proves that power without wisdom is dangerous, but power combined with personal dysfunction can destroy empires. His 3 dead wives, his questionable daughter, his terrorized subjects, and his ruined kingdom all paid the price for a genetic lottery that went wrong centuries before any of them were born. If this shocked you, smash that like button and subscribe for more dark history. Comment below, which twisted ruler should we explore next? Hit the bell for notifications. Thanks for watching.